The city never slept. Even when the moon climbed high, the streets still breathed, cars hissed past like restless snakes, lights blinked without mercy, and people hurried as if chased by invisible drums. The city watched everything, yet it listened to nothing. It rewarded speed, not patience. It praised money, not mercy. In this place, compassion learned to whisper while ambition shouted. Vendors called out their last sales, office lights burned late, and tired workers chased dreams that kept moving farther away. Here, wisdom walked slowly and was often pushed aside. Elders sat quietly on benches, their words heavy with years, but few stopped to hear them. The city had decided that old voices belonged to the past. Tall glass buildings rose proudly, reflecting the sun like mirrors of success. Right beside them stood old family homes, mud walls patched by memory, courtyards shaped by laughter long gone. In those homes, ancestors were still spoken to at dawn, and names carried stories older than money. But the shadows of the towers crept closer each year, covering footprints left by generations. People passed those old houses without looking. Concrete had buried questions no one wanted to answer. What did progress truly give, and what did it quietly take away? Inside many homes, power had changed hands. Elders who once guided families now sat ignored. Their advice was met with sighs and rolled eyes. Respect had been replaced by impatience. Tradition was treated like an old bag, useful once, now too heavy to carry. Some elders whispered to each other, "The house that forgets its roots will fall when the wind comes." At the center of the city's praise stood a man everyone admired. His name opened doors. His picture filled business pages. People pointed at his car and said, "That is success." He walked with confidence, dressed in fine clothes, shaking hands that wanted something from him. When he smiled, cameras flashed. When he spoke, others listened. Yet behind closed doors, his heart was often far away. The city saw his rise, but not the quiet distance growing inside him. It celebrated his wealth without knowing the price he had paid, or who had paid it with him. Long before the suits and meetings, there was a boy with torn shoes and empty pockets. He remembered hunger as a familiar guest. He remembered nights when his mother pretended she was not hungry so he could eat. She would push the bowl toward him and say softly, "A growing child must not sleep on an empty stomach." She washed clothes for others until her hands cracked. She prayed before dawn, calling on ancestors whose names she spoke with respect. Sometimes she placed her hand on his head and whispered, "Walk straight. Do not forget where you come from." Her strength was quiet, but it carried him further than loud promises ever could. Now the city called him great, but the echoes of his mother's sacrifices still followed him, waiting for the day he would truly listen again. The mansion stood on the hill like a crown placed too early on a man's head. Its gates opened with a soft hum, its floors shone like still water, and its walls were thick enough to keep the noise of the city away. When the man first entered it as the owner, he breathed out and said to himself, "I have arrived." He believed money had stitched every old wound closed. He believed peace followed success. Yet inside those wide rooms, voices grew fewer, footsteps sounded farther apart, and hearts began to live in separate corners. Comfort filled the house, but closeness slowly walked out. Not long after, the city welcomed a new woman into his life. She arrived like a bright morning, elegant, confident, always dressed as if the world were watching. At gatherings, people leaned closer to look at her. Women whispered with envy. Men nodded with approval. "She suits him," they said. "She looks like success itself." She smiled easily, and her laughter felt light, but it never reached her eyes. She spoke sweet words and chose them carefully. To the city, she was grace. To ambition, she was a faithful daughter. Power sat gently on her shoulders, wrapped in charm, hidden beneath polished manners. The wedding shook the city with noise. Drums beat late into the night. Music climbed the walls of the mansion. Plates overflowed with food. Praise followed praise. Some celebrated with honest joy, others with tight smiles and measuring eyes. "God has lifted him," one voice said. "Luck has favored her," said another. At the edge of the celebration, elders sat together. They clapped softly but spoke even softer. One old man leaned toward another and murmured, "A pot rushed onto the fire may crack." The other sighed, "Yes. But who listens when the drums are loud?" They said no more. Tradition had learned to whisper in this city. In the days that followed, an elderly woman moved through the mansion like a shadow that refused to disappear. She was the man's mother, the one whose prayers had carried him here. She rose before dawn, tied her wrapper carefully, and greeted the day with quiet words to ancestors unseen. Her steps were gentle. Her voice never demanded space. Sometimes she paused in the living room, touching the wall as if greeting an old friend. "This house grew from my tears," her heart would say, though her lips stayed closed. At the table, she waited to be told where to sit. In conversations, she listened more than she spoke. Slowly, she began to feel like a visitor in a home built from her sacrifices. When she offered advice, it floated in the air and fell without landing. "Mother, times have changed," the young woman once said with a polite smile. The old woman nodded. "Yes," she replied softly. "But the heart of a home should not." Her presence made others uneasy. She carried memories, and memories can be heavy. Respect turned into discomfort. Greetings became quick. Silence followed her like a long shadow. In one quiet corner of the house lived a child who spoke little but saw much. The child learned early which rooms were safe and which were not. Learned when to lower the eyes and when to disappear. Small hands folded neatly, listening more than talking. In that silence, lessons were learned, about power, about fear, about who mattered and who waited. The house was full, yet something important was already missing. The child learned early that small feet must walk carefully in a big house. Every need felt heavy, as if asking for food or comfort added weight to someone else's burden. When hunger came, the child waited. When fear came, the child swallowed it. Love was no longer something freely given. It was measured, counted, and sometimes delayed. In a house filled with voices, the child stood alone, learning that silence could be safer than tears. Sometimes the child would sit near the doorway and listen. Laughter passed by without stopping. Commands were given without looking down. One day, the child whispered softly, "May I eat now?" A sharp pause followed. Then a calm voice answered, "Later." Learn patience. Patience became another name for hunger. Cruelty did not arrive shouting. It came the way night comes, slow, quiet, easy to deny. No hand was raised. No scream was heard. Instead, silence was used like a rope, tightening little by little. A plate was moved away without explanation. A look was enough to send the child retreating. Power lived in routine. Who ate first, who waited, who was seen, who was ignored. The elderly mother noticed these things. Her eyes followed the child more often now. Once, she reached out and placed a hand on the small shoulder. "You are not a burden," she whispered. The child nodded but did not answer. Hope had learned to hide. Soon, the bathroom changed its meaning. It was no longer just a place of water and privacy. It became a place where shame sat quietly on cold tiles. Meals were taken there, quickly, silently, away from the table where others laughed. Food was given without kindness, as if feeding an animal rather than a child and an elder. Eating, once a shared blessing, turned into a punishment. The old woman closed her eyes as she ate. In her heart, she prayed, "Ancestors, see us." The child stared at the floor, learning that dignity could be taken without a single word. Far away, the man chased success through crowded streets and tall buildings. Meetings stacked upon meetings. Phones rang without rest. "I'll be home late," he said often. Work never ends, he told himself, believing the house was peaceful because it was quiet. He trusted the shine of appearances and mistook order for harmony. Each night he returned tired, greeted by smiles that showed nothing and walls that told no stories. Inside the house, silence grew thick. No one complained. No one questioned. Workers lowered their eyes. Neighbors noticed changes but turned their heads. Suffering hid itself to protect names and reputations. Silence became the first betrayal, heavier than any spoken lie. The elders' old warnings echoed faintly, like drums heard from far away. Tradition and modern pride stood on opposite sides of the same door. Respect for elders faded into formality. Power settled where compassion once lived. The ground shifted quietly beneath everyone's feet. And somewhere in that silence, fate began to gather its strength, waiting for the moment truth would no longer be able to hide. The house changed its face at sunrise. When the man left for the city, the walls seemed to shift. Sunlight fell on polished floors, but the warmth of home disappeared. Silence filled the spaces where laughter once lived. Fear crept into corners, pulling at shadows. Each step of the mother and the child was measured, careful, small. The mansion, bright and grand, became a cage, not with locks, but with quiet authority. Power awakened in the absence of the one who should have seen it, and it wore the mask of everyday life. Outside, the city still praised her. She smiled for the cameras, for the guests, for the eyes that measured only beauty and elegance. "See how happy they are," neighbors whispered. Her charm was armor, her laughter a shield. Yet behind closed doors, that same hand that waved at admirers pointed, commanded, and sometimes withheld. Authority became a weapon, and she wielded it carefully. Every action, every pause, every look was designed to keep control while maintaining appearances. The home learned quickly that the smiles the city admired did not reach these walls. She ruled like a queen in a palace made of glass and silence. Elders who had nurtured, guided, and prayed were pushed aside. The child, quiet and observant, shrank under the weight of new rules. "You will eat when I say," she said once, voice calm but final. Obedience became the measure of worth. Every corner of the home whispered her hierarchy, she on top, everyone else beneath. The mansion, so full of sunlight and luxury, now echoed with the unspoken lesson that power proved itself through fear, not care. Pain was taught like a lesson. Hunger became a teacher, and suffering, a discipline. Meals were no longer shared to nourish, but withheld to command. The child understood quickly. Speak too loud, reach too far, ask too much, and food would wait. Even the mother learned that resistance came at a cost. Obedience fed her authority. Every denied bite, every tense pause at the table, every nervous glance, strengthened the rule that silence and compliance were the currency of peace in the house. The first time food was taken away, it was not announced. The plate arrived empty where it should have been full. The child stared at the space, fingers twitching, stomach tightening. The mother held her own hands together, pressing palms to knees, teaching patience through restraint. No words were spoken. Humiliation entered quietly, as if the walls themselves had whispered, "You are not meant to be seen." Hunger, ordinary yet sharp, became the first thread of a web that would bind them in silence and fear. Soon, the bathroom became the table. The child sat cross-legged, the mother beside him, bowls balanced on their knees. The warmth of shared meals vanished. Laughter disappeared. Stories that once traveled with spoons were gone. The home split quietly, divided by cruelty, each meal a reminder of the power that had taken root in absence. In that small, cold space, dignity became fragile, whispers of ancestors the only comfort, and the house, bright and grand, was no longer a home but a lesson in fear. The bathroom had always been a place of water and cleansing. But now, it watched silently as dignity was stripped away. The tiles reflected small, bowed heads, a mother and a child sitting with plates on their laps, eating as if they were shadows of themselves. Even the running water seemed to whisper, bearing witness to the quiet erosion of humanity. Each drop that fell carried the memory of laughter once shared at the table, now replaced by fear. In that small space, the very act of survival had been twisted into shame. In the corners of the house, tradition crouched like old furniture, hidden from sight. The elders who once guided the family now leaned silently in hallways, their wisdom ignored, their presence treated like clutter. The past was pushed aside to make way for modern pride. Ceremonies, stories, blessings, everything that had once held meaning, sat covered in dust, waiting for someone to remember. The house gleamed with glass and metal, but the soul of the family had been buried beneath it. The mother endured. Each time she swallowed her pain, she carried it like a stone in her chest. Her silence was her shield, her sacrifice for the name of her son. No one saw the nights she wept quietly, placing her hand over her heart so he would sleep unaware. To outsiders, she seemed weak. To those who knew, her strength had grown from suffering itself. "I will protect him," she whispered, pressing her lips to the child's head, "even if it costs me everything." When tears could not fall, prayers rose instead. Her voice, barely above a whisper, reached the ancestors. "Guide my child, "Protect him from what I cannot shield," she murmured. In the quiet moments between meals, between tasks, faith became her refuge. She had no one else to turn to, and so the unseen became her companion. Strength existed not in confrontation, but in devotion, hidden in the smallest words and softest bows of the head. Endurance was more than habit, it was a teaching passed down through generations. The mother had learned that silence preserves peace. Speaking up could shatter fragile balance. Duty, she believed, meant holding her tongue and carrying the weight of cruelty alone. Each act of restraint, each day survived, was a prayer in action, a lesson in patience for herself and for the child who watched her closely. The child noticed. Fear arrived before hope. Every raised voice, every sharp glance, every abrupt movement became a warning. Authority, once a word of comfort, now whispered terror. The child's innocence shrank, folded inward, learning to measure steps, words, and looks. Each day, the small heart carried lessons no child should bear: how survival meant silence, how obedience could be life itself, and how a home could feel both protective and dangerous in the same breath. The house, gleaming in daylight, held its secrets like a drum waiting for the right moment to strike. And within it, the mother and child endured, watched over by ancestors unseen, preparing for a reckoning yet to come. The child's small shoulders carried burdens far too heavy for a young heart. Every harsh word, every cold glance, every denied meal became a secret weight pressed down silently. Fingers trembled as plates were set in front of him, and eyes lowered not out of respect, but out of fear. Inside, the child whispered to himself, "It must be my fault. I must have done something wrong." Pain rooted itself quietly, growing alongside innocence. Childhood bent under the weight of injustice, learning lessons no laughter could undo. Obedience became a language understood through trembling hands and careful steps. The child learned that questioning power brought punishment. Asking for kindness invited delay. Every shadow, every sudden tone, became a teacher. Safety, once natural, was now a memory. "Do as I say," a voice commanded once, and the child obeyed, understanding that in this house, survival meant submission. Lessons no child should ever know were etched into the marrow of young bones. The staff moved through the mansion like ghosts, seeing all yet speaking nothing. Eyes caught the mother's bowed head, the child's small frame hunched in quiet. Whispers died on lips that feared dismissal. "Better to keep your place," one maid muttered under her breath, folding laundry tightly, counting each moment until the day was done. Fear for their own survival silenced morality. The house thrived on silence. Each worker carried secrets they would not share, trapped between conscience and necessity. Outside, neighbors smelled the smoke before the fire was seen. Doors opened cautiously. Conversations turned to gossip rather than action. "I heard," one neighbor whispered to another, "they say she is harsh." But no one stepped beyond whispers. The city hummed on the streets, eyes averted, hearts unwilling to intervene. Collective cowardice became the quiet companion of cruelty, letting fear and silence shape the home unseen. Money built walls around truth, thick and high. The mansion gleamed as if proof alone could defend wrongdoing. Comfort silenced conscience. Staff turned away, neighbors pretended ignorance, and the mother and child bore what the city refused to see. Wealth had not only bought status, it had purchased silence. The house became a fortress, keeping the world outside and the pain inside locked in parallel. Above it all, the man rose in the city, climbing higher on stages and in boardrooms. Hands shook, deals closed, accolades arrived. Yet every step forward widened the distance at home. His eyes were fixed on achievement, blinded to the slow decay behind the gates he had built. Even as the city cheered his name, he could not hear the quiet cries, the suppressed whimpers, the life bending under cruelty he refused to see. Success, he believed, was all that mattered, while his home silently fractured beneath him. The man believed in appearances. He saw the polished floors, the gleaming furniture, the smiling wife in the city's light, and he trusted them. He told himself that all was well, that success had healed old wounds, and that wealth had built a life beyond fear. Yet, somewhere deep inside, the elders whispered. The ancestors murmured in dreams and signs he dismissed. Roots that had carried him through hunger and hardship were weakening because he no longer looked beneath the surface. "It's all fine," he muttered to himself as he straightened his tie, unaware that faith in surfaces can blind a heart to truth. Behind closed doors, the values that had once guided him began to die slowly. Authority became a tool for cruelty, silence became a shield for wrongdoing, and each day that passed without recognition of injustice strengthened the hands of power. The mother endured, the child learned fear, and the house became a classroom for lessons no one should have to teach. Yet justice was not gone, only delayed, biding its time. Every whisper, every stolen glance, every suppressed sigh carried the seed of reckoning. Moral tension rose quietly like a storm building in the distance. No one noticed the clouds gathering, neighbors whispered, staff nodded silently, but fate watched patiently. The balance of truth and cruelty shifted like the wind in tall grass. The ancestors, unseen, prepared the way for exposure, waiting for the moment when silence could no longer protect deception. The day began with an unusual resistance. Traffic slowed, as if the city itself had placed obstacles in his path. Calls went unanswered. Meetings cancelled. He had planned to return late, but the road refused to obey him. "Why today?" he whispered, tapping the wheel, unaware that the delay was not chance. It was the hand of the past guiding him home. When he arrived, the mansion felt different. The doors opened to a quiet that seemed to breathe. No laughter, no footfalls, no greetings. The polished floors reflected the sunlight, but the warmth was gone. A subtle unease settled in his chest. Something in the air shifted, and instinct prickled at the back of his neck. The house, his sanctuary of achievement, waited for him with a silence that felt heavy with truth. He stepped inside, and the quiet spoke louder than any city noise. The hum of traffic, the chatter of colleagues, the clink of glasses at celebrations, none of it reached here. The absence of sound was almost physical, pressing against him, shaping the space with tension. Something was wrong, though he could not yet see it. Shadows lay differently. Objects seemed to watch. And in that silence, a warning passed through him, the kind only those who have forgotten their roots can hear too late. The dining table gleamed under the morning sun, plates carefully arranged, silverware polished, the aroma of fresh food filling the air. Yet no one sat there. The chairs waited silently, empty, as though they had forgotten how to hold the weight of family. The prepared meal, meant to nourish and unite, remained untouched. A strange unease pressed against the walls. Something was missing, a presence that should have been there, and its absence was louder than the city's own morning bustle. He followed the soft movements, the subtle sounds he was never meant to hear. A shuffle of feet, a whispered sigh, the gentle scrape of a plate on tile. Curiosity pulled him forward, but each step grew heavier, dread settling like a stone in his chest. The sounds led him through the house, twisting corridors and polished floors, until the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Something hidden waited, calling quietly for recognition, for justice that had long been delayed. The bathroom door appeared, unremarkable yet suddenly monumental. His hand reached for it, hesitant. When it opened, time stretched beyond the normal rhythm of the city. What he saw refused mercy. His mind tried to deny it, tried to call it a dream, but the truth was too vivid, too undeniable. The reality of cruelty, hidden behind the walls he thought safe, revealed itself fully, unflinching and unkind. There they sat. His mother on the cold tiles, her back straight despite the shame pressed against her. Beside her, the child shrank smaller with every passing second, trying to vanish from sight. Plates balanced on their laps, food once meant for celebration now a symbol of survival. Dignity had been stripped away quietly, replaced by obedience, endurance, and humiliation. A mother and child eating where shame lived, beneath the roof that was meant to protect them, revealed the cost of blind trust and absence. Time itself seemed to pause. The city, with its noise, its clamor, its endless praise, faded into silence. The world outside could no longer reach him. Success, deals, accolades, all meaningless. Power, which had once felt like armor, felt useless in that single moment. Pride fell away, leaving only the stark helplessness of a son who had failed to see the truth. The house, the walls, the floor, they all bore witness, and he could not escape their judgment. He looked at his mother's eyes, and they asked for nothing. No complaint, no plea, no anger, only a quiet endurance that spoke louder than words. Love had chosen silence over accusation. Pain had been accepted, not for self, but to shield him from knowing too soon the depths of betrayal. She had carried the weight of shame to protect her son, even as the home they built together became a place of cruelty. The child beside her had learned quickly. Eyes averted, head lowered, small hands folded. Help had been trained away, trust withheld, innocence reshaped by fear. Every gesture spoke of obedience carved into a tender heart, every pause a lesson in how power demanded submission. And as he stood there, the son, the man, the CEO, he finally understood how deeply absence, silence, and cruelty could scar the smallest of lives, leaving marks that wealth could never erase. The bathroom felt impossibly small now, though he had never noticed it before. Its white tiles reflected every detail: the discarded crumbs, the small plate balancing on the floor, the slight slump of his mother's shoulders, the child pressed against her side. Each reflection echoed a truth he had chosen not to see for years. The room held all his failures, every absence, every assumption that money could replace presence, that success could silence the responsibilities of the heart. In this quiet space, the cost of his neglect was laid bare. She stood, and yet did not speak. Her elegance, once praised by the city, held no armor here. Her authority had dissolved before his eyes, unspoken yet undeniable. No sharp words, no deflection, could hide what she had done. The smile that charmed the world could not survive the witness of the room. Cruelty, stripped of pretense, lay bare and trembling. Power faltered under the weight of reality. Fear, which she had used as a tool for control, no longer held. The silence was enough. Her grip on the household had evaporated, leaving only the truth in its place. Justice, slow and patient, had arrived without shouting, without spectacle. It simply existed where the lie could no longer stand. Masks fell like dry leaves in the harmattan wind. The faces worn for society, the carefully crafted smiles and gestures, scattered across the floor of the house he had built. He saw her, not as a queen of charm or a mistress of propriety, but as she was. Her character revealed by action, by choice, by the suffering she caused. And above them all, ancestors seemed to watch, their silent eyes recording the story for the generations to come. Memories surged, unbidden and fierce. He remembered hunger, nights when a single meal meant survival, the sharp pangs that had defined his childhood. He saw his mother in his mind, enduring pain to protect him, her sacrifices weaving the path he now walked. Pain, he realized, had shaped him, had taught him resilience, had rooted him in the truths he had forgotten in the pursuit of comfort. Wealth had stolen his sight. Success had muted intuition, comfort had dulled his instinct to notice, and pride had grown as a wall between him and reality. The city's applause had blinded him to suffering within the home. He had believed in images, in appearances, and the truth had waited patiently for the moment he could no longer ignore it. And then he understood the betrayal that had never spoken a word. Neglect was cruelty in silence. By trusting the facade, by ignoring signs and dismissing whispers, he had been complicit. Responsibility pressed on him now, heavy but necessary. The house, the mother, the child, they demanded accountability, and for the first time, he accepted it fully, aware that acknowledgement was the first step toward restoration. The mansion, once a monument to triumph, now felt strangely smaller. Marble floors reflected not pride, but emptiness. The chandeliers, dripping with crystal, could not illuminate the weight pressing on the heart within. In the cold silence, the bathroom where his mother and child had endured shame seemed larger than the house itself, a stark reminder that wealth could never build walls around truth. Every gleaming corner whispered what money had failed to protect. Values had been ignored, tradition neglected, and dignity trampled. The echoes of the city's praise, once as sweet as ripe mangoes in summer, now sounded hollow. Reporters' smiles, the accolades of peers, the clinking of glasses in high-rise celebrations, all dissolved into meaninglessness. Reputation, polished and admired, could not cover the fracture within. The public's applause was paper-thin, easily torn by the weight of what had been unseen and ignored. And in that silence, the inner truth demanded action, impatient and unyielding, like a drumbeat from the ancestors themselves. Shame settled heavier than any boardroom loss. It was not the failure of a deal, nor the misstep in negotiation. It was the moral failure, ancestral in its gravity. His mother's eyes, calm but piercing, carried the centuries of endurance, reminding him that a man's worth is measured in honor, not in contracts signed or skyscrapers raised. For the first time, the CEO felt the chasm between wealth and righteousness, between comfort and conscience. He stood at the edge, the precipice of transformation stretching before him. Without ceremony, without warning, justice arrived. Not with thunder or sword, but quietly, firmly, and completely. The bathroom, the hidden meals, the silenced faces, truth presented itself with relentless clarity. There was no escape, no defense, no bargaining with destiny. It knocked, demanding acknowledgement, pressing the consequences into the heart that had been blind for too long. Fate had come full circle, and the scales of morality finally shifted. Illusions shattered like clay pots dropped on stone. The life he had known, the accolades, the praise, the image, was now divided into before and after. He saw, at last, the cost of neglect, the depth of cruelty hidden in silence, the pain inflicted under the guise of order. The path toward consequence and redemption stretched ahead, clear and inevitable. The mansion was no longer a fortress of pride. It was a house in which truth walked boldly, unafraid of gold or glass. And the room of shame, once the center of fear, lost its power. The bathroom, where dignity had been stripped, where humiliation had been served like bitter porridge, now stood empty and powerless. Symbols of cruelty, the cold tiles, the harsh light, the imposed isolation, were nothing more than walls without authority. What had been a place of punishment became a silent witness to the restoration of honor. Power, they learned, does not live in wealth. It resides in justice, in conscience, and in the respect owed to the human soul. The house breathed differently now. Where silence had once been heavy with fear, small sparks of warmth began to flicker. The mother and child stepped back into the spaces of the home that had long denied them their place. The dining table, once a throne of cruelty, now welcomed their presence. A simple gesture, hands laid on bowls, a shared glance, a soft word, restored dignity more surely than gold or glass ever could. In those moments, the household began to relearn what it meant to be human. He watched quietly, realizing that authority built on fear was fragile. Walls that had seemed unshakable now shook under the weight of truth. The old order fell without a single blow. No voices rose in protest, no fists demanded compliance. Obedience born of terror crumbled like dry earth in the rain, and balance began its quiet return. Outside, society had once applauded a woman whose beauty blinded judgment. Her smile had been a shield, her charm a carefully constructed mask. But now the veil was gone. Eyes that had been dazzled by elegance could see the rot beneath. Whispers of recognition replaced cheers. The city learned what the house had already known. Outward splendor could never protect inner corruption. And the cost of cruelty revealed itself not in headlines, not in public trial, but in silence. Influence slipped from fingers once tightly clenched, admiration faded, leaving only emptiness. Power, the kind that had fed on suffering, dissolved quietly. The hands that had commanded now trembled at the truth they had ignored. Those same streets that had once celebrated her now turned their faces away. The applause that had once filled banquet halls and boardrooms vanished like morning mist. Social approval, fragile as smoke, retreated, leaving only the echo of conscience. Reputation, once a gilded mask, now revealed the hollowness beneath. Through it all, the mother remained calm. She did not raise her voice. She did not cast stones. She refused to drink from the cup of revenge. Her strength was quiet, measured, ancestral. "Let the spirits judge, and let our hearts heal," she whispered to the child, and in her restraint, she taught a lesson older than any city, older than the wealth that had blinded her son. True power lies in peace, not retaliation. The mother rose slowly, her hands folded over her chest, her eyes calm as a quiet river. She did not shout. She did not demand. Yet in her silence, the house felt the weight of centuries, the wisdom of ancestors and the strength of those who had endured before. "Mercy," she whispered, "is not weakness. It is the crown of the upright." Her words were small, but their echo filled the halls. Cruelty shrank back into corners, and dignity, long hidden, began to breathe again. The old values, like deep roots beneath the soil, were correcting the wrongs modern ambition had created. No voice rose, yet lessons were learned. The child watched how actions carried weight far beyond words. When the mother offered a hand, the gesture alone taught respect. Silence became authority, and authority grew without anger or intimidation. Slowly, The child's heart began to accept that the home could be a place of safety. Step by step, the child's trust returned. A hand on a shoulder, a shared meal, a quiet smile. These small acts built walls of protection stronger than any gate. Fear loosened its grip with every consistent gesture of care. Trauma, once buried in shadows, began to surface, acknowledged but no longer shaping daily life. The future started to form from tenderness rather than pain. The cycle of suffering that had bound generations was broken. Lessons passed down in silence now replaced abuse. Where fear once lived, hope took root, small and insistent. The CEO, too, felt the stirring of ancestral memory. He knelt in the soil of his youth, hands brushing earth still warm with life, recalling the mother who had carried him through hunger and hardship. He remembered who he had been before city lights and glass towers, before ambition had blinded him to simple truths. Power, he learned, begins at the doorstep. Leadership is not measured in wealth or titles, but in protection and justice for those closest to you. Humility replaced pride. Compassion replaced control. His transformation was not announced with speeches or headlines. It was sealed quietly in acts, repairing, nurturing, and guiding. Outside, the city continued to roar with its ambition, indifferent to the household's small victories. But inside, peace had returned. True success, he understood, could not be measured in applause. Money alone could never shield moral failure. Wealth without values was empty, a warning carved into the quiet walls of the home. Respect for elders restored balance, and tradition reclaimed its rightful place. Harmony returned, like the gentle rhythm of drums echoing across the savannah, guiding hearts toward patience and understanding. Redemption, earned through accountability rather than revenge, became the new story of the house. Justice came quietly, firmly, without cruelty. And as the sun dipped low, painting the city in shades of gold and orange, the tale closed not with noise, but with wisdom. True success, the elders' voices whispered, is measured by how one treats the weak, honors the past, and carries humanity above status. The story lingered like a proverb, passing from one generation to the next, a reminder that life, like the soil, nurtures only what is sown with care, love, and respect.